Hello and welcome to Whole Latte Love Coffee Seminars. I'm Zach.
And I'm Missy, and today we're going to be going over pulling the perfect shot. So Zach, why do I have 2 tomatoes in front of me?
You know what? I'm going to do a little experiment today when it comes to extraction, so stick around and find out.
Okay.
You have to stick around, so I'm telling you guys to kind of stick around and find out why tomatoes have to do with extraction today. So a little bit about today's structure before we get into our tomato debauchery. We're going to be going through kind of the equipment needs that you have to have in order to pull some shots. So specifically kind of grinders, machine. If you can follow along with us, if you have some tomatoes, bring them out. Just kidding, you don't need those today, but you might need an espresso machine and a grinder. After that, we're going to go through some Burr choices. We're going to talk a little bit about geometry. We won't get too crazy with it, but we'll definitely mention some things. After that, we'll go through our temperature, a little bit about flow, and then we're going to get into some coffee algebra as well. So, yeah, might need to bust out the calculator that Ben might have to grab on my desk. So then after that, we'll get into some final questions as well.
Awesome. We're going to be going through questions throughout, so if you have questions, make sure to type them out in the chat, and we will get to those. Feel free to give us a thumbs up as well.
Perfect. So with that, I guess we should probably go into some of the stuff that we need for today.
What do we need today?
So today we have a Profitec drive. So we are using a PID today. Okay. So we do want to look at temperatures today. So we want to be pretty specific. So preferred would be a dual boiler, so we can really look at that temperature, but really anything with a PID will do for today, just as a little experiment. So you can definitely utilize that. Then we also have a couple different Burrs today in different grinders. So we have a VS3, we have a grinder from Eureka as well, a W75. Then we also have a Chiato E37S as well. That's just a couple fun things. You do not need that, but you do need a grinder of some sort.
Something espresso specific.
Yes. Yeah. And then, of course, coffee. We need to use coffee today, quite a bit actually. Then some distribution tools. We're not going to talk too much about your prep techniques of any sort. Missy's going to be our coffee pro today, pulling our shots so we can be kind of tasting as we go and the effects of some of the things that we're going to be talking about as we go. You're also going to be my taste tester today as well.
Okay, awesome. I'm ready to get some more caffeine in me.
Perfect. And with that, let's go ahead and just start our conversation about Burrs.
Okay. So what do we need to know about Burrs? Like, does Burr size matter?
It does, and for a few different reasons. And first, we kind of need to talk about our overall extraction. What's happening with an espresso that makes it so difficult? It's a very volatile process. There's so many things at hand when it comes to this. And this is actually due to the process of erosion.
Erosion, so just like with nature.
Just like with nature. So when it comes to espresso, we aren't working with too much time. As you know, most of our extractions are kind of happening within, or under that 30 seconds or so. Yeah. Where filter coffee, we're actually utilizing something called diffusion. So time is on our hands. So we're kind of melting that coffee over time, as it's kind of the way to put that. Yeah.
It's like if you were to put some kind of dissolvable powder into your water and you're dissolving it.
Exactly. Yeah. So time is on our hand to actually create that extraction. With espresso, we're dealing with pressure, a bunch of random things, and we really have to look at our grind size because of erosion. We're kind of washing the surface.
Okay.
So if we're washing the surface of something and we want to create more of an extraction of something, then we need to increase our surface area. Now we can do so by breaking apart our coffee into several different fragments, which you can kind of see here. We have something that breaks off into a grind size distribution. So not every grind is going to be the exact same grind size. So as you can see,
a finer one?
This one's going to be a finer one. So with fine particles, you can actually pinch these and it might feel kind of like a powder as well.
Okay, yeah, like a fine dirt powder. Now that's ground for espresso specifically.
So this one's a little bit finer than espresso.
Oh, really?
This one's,
maybe like a Turkish?
Yeah, this one's definitely towards a Turkish. Where on the other hand, we have something closer to what we call boulders. Now, your burrs can produce both of these grind sizes even at a smaller grind size distribution. as well. So if we're looking at our espresso distribution, there might be some of these boulders within that coffee puck, hopefully not.
Yeah, so that's more like a pour over size, you'd say?
Exactly, with that pour over size. These can be kind of diffused over time, where these, we're increasing our surface area on those fines so we can more easily and immediately extract them. Because our fines will contribute to about 50% of our surface area and only 10% of our volume as well in an espresso.
Gotcha.
But largely our extraction comes to this fines percentage.
And those fines are going to be particles that are less than 300 microns in size. And then boulders are over 500 microns and generally a little bit larger than what you're aiming for espresso.
Exactly. So each one of these burrs will contribute to a different grind size particle distribution. So we oftentimes test all of our grinders towards these grind size particle distributions according to what they're really going to taste like. If it produces more fines within that distribution, it's going to create a higher extraction because it's producing more fines. This often happens in things like our conical shaped burrs, which we have here. And that is due to the fact that they kind of trap within our burr and they really get stuck and they keep getting to a finer and finer grind size before actually leaving the burr.
So
itself.
There's a lot more retention in there.
So it retains a lot more and it gets to a smaller and smaller grind size during that process. Now there are ways around this as well, like pre-mashing burrs, like these other ones from our Vario VS3 that will kind of pre-mash it first into a smaller grind size before then exiting. Now, you can actually produce the same amount of fines depending on the geometry and that exit velocity. So certain burrs are kind of designed with specific teeth to really hone in on that exit velocity and how long it's actually being trapped and turned into these smaller and smaller particles within this.
So you can tell these manufacturers have done a ton of research in coming up with each of these burr geometries.
Exactly, and a ton of research also within the different hardnesses of this as well. So different hardness levels will create different sharpness levels and kind of cut your particles into different sizes as well.
And then when they're sharper for longer, they're going to last longer. So for example, if it's got the diamond inside coating, those are going to be rated to last longer.
Exactly. So they will last longer, and that also goes into effect of a lot of our pre-seasoning of our burrs as well. So that's going to be something that we talk a lot about. And why that is important is actually up to 3 different things that we really look at. But first, I kind of want to show an example of this grind size particle distribution as well. Yeah. So let's go ahead and utilize this dye fluid grind size particle analysis. And what we're going to do is actually see kind of the numbers to these particles. Now, it's very difficult to create a particle analysis of these fine grinds because they kind of clung together. And you kind of see that within your coffee baskets that they do cling together as well.
Yeah.
So what we can do is lightly grab a little bit of this smaller.
That is the cutest spoon I have ever seen in my whole life.
So this is a 1 drop, so 1/64th teaspoon here.
1/64th teaspoon.
And we're going to go ahead and grab a little drop of that, literally a drop of this. And with this, we can kind of determine our grind size particle distribution. And this will actually show me a lot of what this coffee might extract. So we can also distinguish if it's very close to certain burrs than others. I can already kind of see if it's going to taste like this Malkonig burr or this Chiato burr, dependent on these numbers. Here it's kind of separating out our grind size.
I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, what is happening?
All right, so here it immediately shows that we have a fine grind. It's showing an average of 442, which is going to be pretty incorrect, actually, because they're most likely clinging together. You can see how many particles it's counting, which is a pretty high amount for just a drop. But you can also see that ratio is kind of correct on that basis that 50% are going to contribute to this fine.
Gotcha.
Then we can actually start getting into more of our numbers. So anything before that 300 point is our fines percentage. And as we look at some of these grind sizes, as we get to these 800ths and larger, is actually the fact that some of these are going to cling together.
So it's not actual boulders, as we can see.
Yeah, as you can see, all those fines have started to cling together there. And this can also create channeling within your puck as well. But a lot of these can be controlled through different techniques that we'll go through shortly. And just to show a better grind size distribution of how we typically use these, we're going to go ahead and take a grind size analysis of a little bit of this pour over grind size.
Awesome. And what coffee is this, out of curiosity?
So this is just going to be our crema wave. So it is a little bit on like a dark medium blend. Again, taking a drop. And we're going to do another analysis here.
And that electrocution noise.
Electrocution noise. Okay. All right. And this is showing a medium with a micron reading of 846. So microns is kind of how we're actually controlling our size, and it's kind of our, what is our characteristic?
Unit.
Unit. There we go.
Unit of measurement.
Missy helping me out
for grind
today.
size.
Our unit measurement for grind size, our microns. So here we took 970 counts, so it's a larger particle size within that drop, averaging to 846. And as you can see here, this is our grind size distribution. And even on pour overs, we still have a fines percentage here. So this contributes a lot to our immediate extractions. But since we have so many particles on this side, this is how we know that we need to use a diffusion technique within this.
Okay. So now when we have fines like that, would you say that that might add to the body in the cup?
It would. It would add to your body and your overall extraction. This is one of the main contributions to actually change your extraction percentage.
Okay.
Now we have a couple numbers that we'll reach into a little bit later going through our coffee algebra and why those kind of matter, but it doesn't contribute too much to your overall taste in a way as much as some other things.
Interesting.
So when picking your burr, and you do want to kind of control a lot of those fines percentages, I typically look at 3 different factors.
Okay.
So those factors are going to be your sharpness, your size, and your alignment of these burrs. So sharpness, you might see a whole bunch of different coatings. These are pretty sweet of those Chiato burrs. We have some SSP burrs.
Like rainbow coating on these puppies.
They not only look beautiful, but they also contribute a lot to that sharpness as well. So these will keep its sharpness a lot longer, and they will be way more consistent that way. Now, if you do have just some regular burrs, you know, that's totally okay, but they will not be as consistent right away as these SSPs.
Yeah.
So they will have to go through a seasoning process, is what we call it.
So seasoning, we would just be running some beans through there to essentially get a little bit of sharpness out of the burrs, is that right?
Exactly, more consistency. So as these burrs are being crafted, there's going to be a lot of manufacturing oils, and there's going to be a lot of fine edges to it as well. So we want consistency. We want to, you know, kind of wear them down just slightly to the point where it's consistent. And the more consistent we can actually cut those, the more we can actually control our extractions a little bit better. And this is where it kind of comes down to tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
Yes.
Looks like we did have a comment there from Ricardo. He said, "Thank you for the nice work on setting up all the gear and addressing a lot of possible doubts we usually have." Yeah, you're welcome. We're happy to do it. It's a ton of fun.
Awesome.
Looks like Igor from Holland is tuning in.
Hello, Igor.
Hi.
Also, hi, Mark. Also.
Hi, Mark. Okay, tomatoes.
Tomatoes. So you might be wondering why I am really doing this example right now.
Why?
Okay, so the main example is as we are actually creating a cut into our coffee, it really matters because we want consistency. So the sharper our edges are, the more consistent our extractions are going to be. As our burrs start wearing down, we have no consistency.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to make a sandwich, would I want to cut the sandwich, or would I want to hit it with a hammer, or in this case, a puck?
I think probably cut it. Also, like if I were gonna cut up tomatoes for salsa, I probably want the tomato pieces to be around the same size versus just like half of a tomato and a little small teeny piece.
Exactly.
That would not be great.
So as your burrs start to wear down, what happens to your coffee? Well, do you want to give us an example of what happens to your coffee?
Yeah. So we're gonna smash this tomato as if it is a blunt burr, basically. Ready? Oh, that went everywhere. That was great. Okay.
So
I think
basically,
I may have got some on my face.
Instead of cutting our tomato, we are just crushing our beans. And a couple other ways that we can start crushing our beans, like this tomato, heat. The way it transfers onto our beans, they also plasticize into more of a tomato. Now, if you could imagine that this tomato was more brittle, it might break up into smaller fragments. But as soon as heat and your grinder is starting to produce heat onto your coffee, it's going to become this tomato.
I see.
Now, on the other hand, if we're keeping things as cool as possible, as sharp as possible, and as aligned as possible, we can actually take nice, simple cuts and we can start predicting things a lot easier. So keeping things nice, sharp, and aligned, we can have precision cuts and we can really make a nice sandwich. I mean, it would probably taste pretty good either way in this case, but with coffee, not so much.
Not so much. Yeah, you want to cook things that are similar size, just like when you were going to chop up an onion and saute it. If you have nice, even pieces of that onion, it's going to cook at a more even rate.
Exactly.
Now, don't forget, if you have questions, keep those coming. So
we can see them live, right?
Yes.
As we see. And then the last thing that I really look for is how easy it is to really align these burrs. So as you can see on the Chiato behind me, it's pretty easy to actually take apart over here. You just take off 3 screws and I can easily clean things, align them pretty well, add some shims. But if they aren't aligned whatsoever, you're only cutting half of that tomato.
Yeah.
Some of that tomato is just falling out that larger exit velocity. So again, exit velocities are going to be huge when you have consistency with these burrs. All right, so with that, make sure you have some questions coming because we're going to kind of keep moving on here.
Okay, yeah.
We kind of talked about how heat transfer, affects your coffee itself, but it also affects your flavor. So as your burrs are producing a lot of heat on your coffee, you're releasing a whole bunch of different aroma compounds as well.
Right, just like when you walk into a cafe and you smell that coffee's been grinding, or maybe even at home you smell that coffee's been grinding.
Yeah, so much of that has to do with flavor. If you didn't already see Kenzie and my seminar based off of palate priming, we ate some sourdough and smelled some oranges at the same time, and aroma compounds are most of what we're going for when we're looking at extracting good espresso. So we want to trap that in as much as possible, reduce that heat. But we can also do this on our machine. So what I'm going to have you do is pull us a shot at an extreme temperature today. So I think we're around 202, 203. And we're going to start here as a little experiment. So at these higher temperatures, we're going to start seeing a different compound release within our coffee. So as we might know, as soon as we start pulling our shot, and as soon as water releases from our group head, we start seeing a drop in temperature as it's permeating through our coffee puck. So at different points inside this puck, we're also going to be allowing different extractions of these different compounds. They're all going to taste differently. That top side of the puck is going to taste different from the bottom side. Even when breaking this coffee down, the top of this puck is also going to extract different compounds than the bottom. And it happens quickly. It happens within just this small little bit of resistance as well. So temperatures not only extract these differently, but also change your flow. And also are more soluble at these higher temperatures. So controlling your temperature throughout this extraction is extremely important when it comes to taste, and largely due to the flow rate that you find within this. So let's go ahead and pull a shot at 202, and we're going to pay attention to a couple different things. We're going to pay attention to the permeability and the flow, and we're going to go ahead and taste our coffee as well.
All right, here we go.
There we go.
Here we go.
Perfect. So pretty quick to the start there.
Yeah.
And then to a steady stream though, so pretty constant. And we're hitting like 10 bar too, so pretty high pressure. And we'll knock that off. Perfect. So we had about 40 grams out, 18 grams in, a little bit more than a normale, but still probably pretty well rounded. We have a nice crema as well on here. You know, it looks like a pretty great shot, but it's definitely pretty hot as well of an extraction. So let's go ahead and have you taste this. So what kind of notes are we getting from this higher extraction?
I'd say a little bit of acidic notes.
Okay.
It's a little on the sour side.
A little on the sour side?
Yeah. It
Gotcha.
pulled a little fast as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that flow rate was definitely changed within that actual extraction. So we can also pull a shot at a lower temperature. So let's go ahead and pull one at 195. We're going to go pretty drastic. We might have to purge out quite a bit to really lower this temperature. And we're going to pay attention to both the flow rate and the overall taste and extraction. We're going to hold on to these as well, just so I can then take a TDS as this cools. So we're going to do that towards the end so we can start describing a little bit more of that coffee algebra. So as we're extracting through these temperatures, we're actually keeping the same exact, well, maybe not exact, depending on your puck preparation, your exact same extraction percentage, either at 202 or at this low 195. But you might be questioning me, and it's like, no, but they're going to taste different. Well, there's different compounds that are going to be released through these different temperatures. Some are more volatile, some are less volatile, some are going to be extracted at the top, some are going to be extracted at the bottom. So we need as much of a consistent temperature as possible when dialing into certain flavor profiles.
Yeah.
So I would highly suggest at home, you know, maybe pulling a shot at a high temperature and low temperature.
There we go.
Identifying what flavor compounds you're really getting off of these coffees, and maybe dialing in your temperatures accordingly.
Okay, here we go.
Now 202, this wasn't actually over-extracted, I would say, unless that had to do more with the over-extraction over flow.
It tasted overall good.
Exactly, but there's going to be different compounds released on this than the shot that you're about to pull. So the different compounds being released at different temperatures kind of vary. There's a lot of different organic acids that we find throughout coffee, and you might dial these in over time by experimenting with different, processing methods that you might find more carbs from fermentation processes, but there's also a lot of less volatile compounds that you can get towards a high extraction temperature, like furan or pyridines, that contribute a lot to spicy and smoky, maybe bitter, astringent, sour notes that we'll find at those higher temperatures. So kind of a bad thing to go towards in some cases, but in some cases, this can also create a well-rounded shot if you have those super floral light roasts with a lot of organic acids that contribute a lot to like those nice floral or fruity tastes. So that combination of these things can be really nice at those high temperatures. But what if we just want to acid bomb? Well, that's what we're going to do right now.
Acid bomb.
We're going to do an acid bomb right now with all of those more volatile compounds that are initially released from your extraction. So let's go ahead and try this out and see what happens. Again, we're going to pay attention to this flow. Should kind of come out really fast. Some channeling involved as well. Yeah. So a lot less resistance, I would say, within this.
A lot less resistance for sure.
Yeah, so a large part of this resistance actually has to do with gas. So CO2, which you can see in the form of crema, is actually being released and chemically altered and changed throughout this process. Now, the higher your temperature, the more resistance that you get because it's actually bubbling up at this point. The CO2 is really bubbling up and creating that resistance on its own. Now, you might find this pretty difficult to do with store-bought coffee that's already released a lot of its CO2, so it's going to flow really fast no matter what, because it's already lost a lot.
Yeah.
So if you do buy store-bought coffee, maybe go to a higher pressure and a higher temperature and see what you can really get from the last of its CO2 to create any sort of resistance. On the other hand, a lot fresher coffee, you might need to go towards a lower temperature to increase that flow a little bit. So it's kind of changing things that change the other. And there's also a way that we can manipulate flow as well to manipulate taste.
I would say that this shot was more juicy.
Juicy, perfect, awesome. So this is gonna get more into those initial organic acids that are a little bit easier to extract, but we're gonna keep this to the side. Now, both of these shots, they performed just about the same. So 38 grams to 39 grams out. Now, let's go ahead and remember those numbers because we will use it for our coffee algebra a little bit later. So after our gases are then being released, we can then cool off our shots from there as well. So as our shots are cooling, and we're going to get into our coffee algebra a little bit later, we do need to kind of talk about how our flow changed throughout this process. And there's actually a couple different ways that we can now manipulate our flow as well to change our flavor.
Yeah, so with changing your flow, you can either manipulate it with something like a flow control device, or also with pre-infusion. And then, you know, you're gonna probably demonstrate with those, with the kettle and the sprayer, right?
I will. So I do have a little bit of a demonstration about kind of our turbulence and things that are kind of happening within our puck as well that contribute a lot to that change in flow. So as we're losing that resistance, maybe changing our temperature because maybe we like it at a different temperature, it might not be contributing to any crema at this point, but it tastes really good, we can then start messing around with flow because as we're lowering that temperature, it's going to start pulling really fast. So if we actually start changing our flow on our flow control, we can really control those consistent temperatures throughout that permeability as well.
Right, because as you were saying, it's going to hit the top of the puck and be hotter than when it hits the bottom of the puck.
So what I'm going to do is just a little bit of an experiment to actually show how much your basket depth, as well as what fines migration might do, as well as this turbulence as well is doing within your puck. So I'm going to go ahead and throw some of these coarse grinds down at the bottom here.
Right.
I'm going to top it off with some of these fine grinds.
Oh.
And let's go ahead and pretend this is kind of your compressed basket. All right, so with this, I'm going to go ahead and compress it down just a little bit. We're just doing this little bit of experiment. Let's pretend this is our coffee puck at this point. Now, turbidity is something that kind of naturally happens when you can't control too much of your flow and you don't have kind of a resistance within our puck, because flow is determined based off of this resistance. Fines can control this resistance, but as we increase our fines, then things can become very bitter at the same time. So if we have this control over our grinds, the better tasting shot that we can really get.
Totally.
But as an example of what's happening under like maybe 9 to 10 bar of pressure, this is kind of an experiment that I would do at home. No, I wouldn't, but let's see how messy we can really make this. So if we have no control over flow and how even our distribution is, we're really going to create a lot of turbulent flow throughout this. I know you're stepping away.
I've got tomato all over me from the last one, so.
So this happens very easily within pulling shots of espresso, and it can really break off and cause what's called channeling, as well as fines migration. All these fines might actually channel all the way to the bottom of this cup as well.
Oh yeah.
All right, so this also. All right, so it might kind of sit at the top and then occasionally find little tiny channels throughout as well.
Yeah, you can see it going through there. It almost looks like, if you see a close-up, it almost reminds me of like you see an ant farm on display. Yeah.
Now, all these fines can actually migrate directly to the bottom, depending on how this is going. And it's really important to actually control this flow too, because as you can see, we have a very uneven extraction kind of coming across right now.
Not ideal at all.
No. Now, I do see inside the comments here that, puck screens, does this affect taste? Well, it can affect this part where it's kind of evenly extracting and distributing throughout, but I kind of keep my machine clean this way because, as you can see, turbulent flow can also really destroy your shower screen and create a lot of fines to backdrop. So
it looks like Cool J77 has a question. Won't conical burrs run cooler?
This depends. Yeah, so this depends on both how fast your RPMs are, which is kind of what we're really experimenting with in coffee right now, our kind of rates per minute, or
RPM.
RPM, rates per minute, rotations per minute. There you go. Ben's helping me out back there. So that's something that we're experimenting with currently. So as we decrease or increase that, we can decrease or increase the amount of heat, as well as consistency, how long it's being trapped within there to create more or less fine. So you do get a different flavor profile depending on your RPMs as well.
A lot of time conical burrs do better at a lower RPM.
Yeah, definitely. So those do really well. So they do kind of have less heat transfer in that way because it does work a little bit slower.
Right.
So it's less friction throughout that entire process. But here we see a lot of our fines have kind of migrated to the bottom. So this is kind of what happens to our puck without any sort of pre-saturation or flow control.
Yikes.
So if we do have flow control and we can really control what is happening here, like let's say this kettle is now controlling our flow, we can more evenly extract our coffee. And also our fines that are very easily soluble can actually immediately extract and we'll have an even extraction of that bed and then get into our full extraction without them migrating to the bottom and clogging a whole bunch of those pores at the bottom as well.
Right, it's doing more of that erosion.
Exactly. We're washing away a lot more even throughout this process. So a lot of that can cause a lot of our bitterness that we can find. So a lot of channeling if we don't have flow control and maybe store-bought.
Exactly. And then it looks like Igor asked, big is better, I'm assuming burr size?
Yes, burr size. So with that, it mainly has to do with friction.
Friction.
Yeah. So
and maybe temperature a little?
Yeah, so friction causing temperature.
Okay.
Variations in that temperature. So if you spread out that heat and less of that burr is doing more work, more of that burr is doing all the work, you can spread out that heat that it's working at. Yep, exactly. So
it looks like Weird Flex says, afternoon, I was wondering if using different thickness puck screens can affect the taste.
I feel like puck screens more have to do with the even distribution, and water distribution. So if you don't have a good distribution of your actual shower screen, that's when it's going to make a big effect. But if you do have an even distribution of your shower screen, there's going to be less of an effect on that. So puck screens are, I typically use them just to keep my shower screen clean. So between extractions, if I'm testing out new machines, that's when I'll throw those on. It won't make too much of a big difference on that extraction like your actual grind size will.
Grind size is really everything.
Yeah, grind size really is everything, and that resistance and the flow, which go hand in hand within that equation. So if we're talking about flow and a regular profile so we can get rid of fines migration and have a nice even extraction, well, I actually have a graph of a nice pre-infusion to what I call a ramp down. So with flow profiling, that's what we can kind of utilize with machines like our Profitec Drive here. So as we start our shot, I'll actually start with my flow control completely closed and slowly start ramping it up. As I ramp it up, I keep it around 3 bars or so for just a small period of time before it hits that max stock flow pressure. Now, as I hit that stock flow, I want to keep the fact in mind that we are eroding away our coffee over time, and things can become very bitter towards the tip of that shot. So as our flow is starting to channel through, we can decrease our pressure inside our puck. So we'll slowly decrease a ramp down in pressure so we're not eroding too much of our coffee and we're creating too much turbulence within our puck as we are extracting. So this is a basic pre-infusion to ramp down technique that I highly recommend trying at home.
Sweet. So should we pull the shot?
Let's go ahead and pull a shot. So this one, we're going to kind of simulate one of these pre-infusions to a nice little ramp down. Now, we've known this for a very long time about flow. In fact, a lot of this was studied back in the 19th century using sand and sandboxes, basically seeing what happens with distribution and resistance with sand. So we do have a firm grasp of what is eroding away and how it's eroding away within our puck, but visually speaking, a lot of this is kind of hard to grasp and kind of nonsense when first starting a lot of this. But this is how we kind of understood what happened with fines migration and some of these techniques that we're now utilizing and expanding within the coffee industry. So we're going to go ahead and pull a little shot here. Any questions out there about everything that we've gone through so far? Let's see. So Ricardo's saying you're basically loosing from grinding, correct? Can you read that? I'm horrible at reading this.
Oh yeah, you're basically losing from grinding. What would be the ideal world? Medium speed and as new as possible burrs?
Always as new as possible burrs that have actually been seasoned throughout that process. Really, the ideal world is consistency is key. So when it comes to flavor profiles, then temperature consistency is going to be the key. When it comes to controlling your extraction, your particle distribution is going to be key. So conical shapes, it's going to be great for a lot of dark roasts that are pretty brittle as well, that can quickly kind of fall through and stop creating a lot of those fines, because brittle coffee breaks up into fines pretty immediately. On the other hand, a lot of light roasts, you might find a better bet on these flat burr grinders as well.
Okay, gotcha.
So, follow according to taste. There's nothing as perfect like the perfect setup. It's really according to what you like. So maybe try both. Something like the VS3 will tell you a lot. So
yeah, your tongue's always going to be your true north.
Follow your tongue.
Follow your tongue, not your heart. So on this one, do we want to? Where do we want to set this?
All right, so we're going to start it all the way locked off because we're going to want to do a pre-infusion. I want control over that pre-infusion, so it starts, saturating and wetting my bed. So all those fines that are more immediately soluble, so they don't migrate to the bottom whatsoever, like what happened inside this cup. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start our shot. And I'm going to slowly ramp up to my pre-infusion. And increase my flow to my stock. And then as I'm eroding away and that flow rate's becoming very fast, I start slowing down my flow until I have a pretty consistent flow here. And at that consistent flow, I'll go ahead and ramp that down.
Okay.
All right, so we have 43 out on that. So a little bit higher and farther of an extraction. Pretty smooth?
It's a lot more complex. It's bringing out flavors that I didn't taste in this coffee earlier. So
one thing that really helps with flow control in that pre-infusion, let alone from what we're doing from the fines, we're also having a lot more even of a temperature through that pre-infusion as well.
I'm getting deeper flavors as well.
Yeah, so it has a lot of a huge contribution to your overall texture as well.
Yeah, I would say probably a little more body to that one. So.
Perfect. Yeah. So it looks like we have a couple more questions here before I really get into my coffee algebra of things.
Can you explain the proper technique for using a WDT tool? I generally whisk around the top to even the bed before tamping.
Yeah, so I like to use WDT tool typically when I see a lot of what I call like clinging or I don't have my example of my fine grind anymore, but
can get you some,
as you actually grind out, you'll see a lot of large clumps within your actual grind size distribution. You want this to be as even as possible, spread out as possible, so you can decrease the amount of fines and high density areas within our puck. So high density areas within our puck, you can kind of imagine it. Water's always going to take the path of least resistance around those areas and create channeling. And channeling is really bad because you can actually start releasing a lot of compounds within the coffee that actually produce bitterness. So if you see channeling, it can really produce a lot of bitterness. Now, a good technique that I like to use within this WDT tool, I typically will try to shoot for the areas of higher density, so especially where it's like really piled up here.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times you don't even have to do it.
You want to lift that up a little bit?
Yeah, there we go.
Maybe we can get, there we go.
So a lot of the times you don't actually have to go deep inside your portafilter whatsoever, but really try to distribute these areas of high density or possible high density where it's really piling up, or areas where it's starting to really cling together. So you want a nice even bed. I usually kind of just whip it around towards the top. I do the top first.
Okay.
I actually mainly do the top within this.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then a large thing about WDT tools, really watch out for these edges too, because pressure will work in a way within our portafilters that it immediately wants to bypass our whole entire puck. So never forget the sides as well. So as you're taking it off, try not to lose as much coffee as possible.
I always end up like visualizing when I'm doing a WDT, I visualize kind of like if I'm mowing the lawn or vacuum cleaning, where you want to make sure you're not missing a spot as well.
Yeah. So get rid of clumps and then high density areas, and then clean off your puck, and then you're ready to go. So as simple as that. And that will be pretty well distributed. And that has more to do with your actual overall extraction percentage as well. So channeling will actually decrease a little bit of that extraction percentage, which we might actually see between these a little bit, but they should be pretty similar when it comes to our extraction percentage.
And why is that?
So this has to do with our coffee algebra. So if we actually look at our coffee algebra, I have a couple examples here. Oh, wow, look at that. A nice drive. So within our actual extraction yield is what we're kind of looking at here. We have our total dissolved solids. That's going to be multiplied by our beverage mass and then divided by our dose. So there's a couple things that we're looking there. So our total dissolved solids is going to be taken by one of our dye fluid instruments today. And that's basically shining a light through this and finding a percentage of water to our dissolved solids within that small sample. And we can kind of attribute that then to our whole entire dose from there. And we are typically going for anything between 18 and 22%. And then the TDS that we typically go for within espresso is going to be 8 to 12%. So a couple quick numbers. This is actually what I used to use within our coffee shop every single day. I had 24 different varietals I would dial in daily. So I have quite a lot of experience with one of these TDSs.
For sure, yeah.
Just in case. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with our first example here. All right. So now that these have cooled down, I can go ahead and take a little bit of a sample with this spoon here.
Going with the slightly bigger spoon. Okay, switching it up.
And when you do this, you do want to take your sample from the majority of your base. So a lot of the time you'll see pipettes. Yeah. And you do want to break up the crema as well. Don't scoop it from the bottom because a lot of your fines could come to the bottom.
Makes sense.
So I usually take it to a lot of the base of this, now that the crema has been disturbed pretty well.
That kind of sounds like a band name, Disturbed Crema.
Disturbed Crema. All right. And as this reading, I'm going to go ahead and grab my calculator. Pretty pink pony calculator here. And you can see that I am within my TDS range immediately. So the next number that I need to look at, so I have my T done, so that's going to be 8. Let's clear all this out. 8.07. This is going to be multiplied then by my beverage. So our beverage on this first one was 38.
38, yep.
All right, multiplied by 38 grams. We're going to kind of round things. Then we're going to divide that by our grams in, which was 18 grams all day.
18 grams. We made sure it was 18 even.
All right, so our extraction yield was 17%, so just barely under extracted here. So let's go ahead and just see what happened to our next sample here. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we clean this all off pretty well.
Here you go.
Perfect. Clean off our TDS. And again, this doesn't have too much to do with our overall taste. You will be able to tell what an under-extracted and over-extracted shot is, but we do have plenty of room within this. So this is really utilized as a tool to know when we got a really good shot. We can kind of attribute a number to it, mainly due to our grind size and what happened to our coffee, like how long that coffee off-gassed, at what point we really liked that extraction percentage, at what number on our grinder. We're utilizing it as an additional tool.
Right, because there's already established parameters for these things that we can kind of follow and get in the ballpark for flavor.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and take our low temperature extraction. And we'll take this sample.
Testing.
And we have 7.53, so not too far off just from a temperature change. So let's go ahead and take 17, or so not 17, 7.45.
Okay.
And we're going to multiply that. This output was a little bit different. We did increase our output.
I think it was 40.
Yeah, it was
43?
Oh, it was 39.
39. Thank you, Ben.
Ben over there helping us.
He's like, I was watching.
Keeping track of our numbers
closely.
here.
Oh, he wrote them down. Amazing.
And then we have that divided by 18. And we actually lowered our extraction by 1%. So we're now down to 16%. So our temperature did actually change our extraction a little bit, but that might have to do more with our input output.
Okay.
So when doing this, it should show virtually the same. And honestly, a percentage within this extraction, you will hardly even taste as well. So it virtually didn't really change our extraction between pulling darker, at a higher temperature or that lower temperature. But you know, our flow can also attribute to that little bit of a decrease as well in that actual overall extraction yield. So a couple things there. Mainly really has to do with our grind size. So if we were to take a very fine grind, and we can definitely tell that, you know, that ristretto pulled in 25 seconds is going to taste a lot different. And it's going to pull a lot different number as well. There's more of those solubles within that coffee.
For sure.
Yeah. With that, let's go ahead and get into some of our last tips and tricks as we're running out of time here, and we're kind of droning on about some numbers and coffee algebra and things that you don't necessarily have to do at home according to taste, but they're just kind of fun, you know, to know what your coffee shop might be doing. So some of these things, in order to even taste any of this, it really matters on the water that you're really pairing with.
Right, yeah, because if you were to use, let's say, distilled water or reverse osmosis water, it's not going to be much flavor in that water at all. It might even have a bit of a metallic taste to it.
Exactly.
That affects your coffee.
Some of that metallic taste can be good, but as long as it's some specific minerals to it.
Yeah.
So we actually add a lot of different minerals in order to either decrease the amount of possibilities that your machine will corrode, because if you have really empty water, start exchanging electrons with the inside of your boiler. All of a sudden you have a battery here and you have pinholes inside your boiler. Not good if you're using RO. And then also with that RO super empty water, your brain will not actually recognize most of these acids within these coffees and most of these differences. So it's kind of like seasoning a steak. You know, you kind of want to put a little salt on there to really enhance the flavor profile of that steak.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with minerals. We're kind of seasoning our coffee.
Right, like putting a little baking soda in your marinara.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Same sort of thing. We actually can add baking soda and Epsom salt, you know, to a lot of our water. Now, BWT specifically does this. They filter out and introduce magnesium inside that, so we can really see the different acids, and our brains can really recognize those different acids that are available within your coffee as well.
Because calcium and magnesium taste great to us.
Yeah, so calcium would be great, but it also creates a lot of scale as well. But calcium, sodium, that's a great way to also taste your coffee, but maybe add those in afterwards.
Right.
Not too much though.
For your espresso machine's health.
Exactly. So, but that actual combination of these minerals and these additives to this water actually doesn't affect your extraction percentage, but how we actually perceive it. So it might perceive as under-extracted with super empty water, or over-extracted with super heavy water as well.
It's pretty wild.
Vice versa, the other way.
Because it's like, technically speaking, on this level of bringing it up and looking up close and researching it, it's the same, but the taste is drastically different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the numbers can actually prove that as well. If you're extracting with, RO comparison to a pretty full water, it's virtually the same.
Yeah.
So, and your actual overall coffee extraction. So it looks like we do have a couple questions as we're ending here.
Looks like Cool J77 asks, do you happen to have a preference of temperature of the coffee when tasting?
So I actually do this experiment at home when I'm first tasting my coffee. So you don't necessarily want 202, 203, or 195, because realistically, it's technically within our brew range of 195 to 205, but we don't want that. Those are two extreme examples. I typically like to surf around 200 to 201. This also varies depending on your altitude. I used to actually brew at a very high altitude at 9,000 feet, and I had to lower it at 198 because a lot of turbulence was actually being created on my puck because water would boil at 198 there.
Yeah, science is definitely really strange in how it affects everything that we do.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. If you have like atmospheric questions, this guy's the guy.
Yeah, so I used to have my atmospheric gauges, pressure gauges, behind my bar so I can really see what was happening. You might find that, as soon as a storm's coming through, your shots will taste different and they'll actually pull different. This is all due to barometric pressures that are in your environment, so that can change a lot.
That's just like when you're baking a cake, you're going to get different results based on your weather as well.
Exactly, so looks like there's a couple other questions down here.
I'm asking about the coffee temperature in the cup. Is 1010? Okay, great question.
Yeah.
Is 1010 Fahrenheit better than 150, for example? Yeah, so flavors are going to act different as the coffee cools.
Exactly, and our brains can actually recognize these flavors a little bit easier as it cools too. So this is actually an example of what we do during a coffee cupping as well. We actually taste it at 145 is our initial taste, and we let it cool down from there. Our brains will actually start recognizing specific flavor profiles, the way those compounds are then being released at cooler temperatures. Now, if you let it cool off too long, things can become more acidic as well at those temperatures. So as much as extraction, you have a different taste during that extraction, letting things cool down have as much of a noticeable difference according to taste as well. So that's an experiment that you have to do on your own. It varies from coffee to coffee.
Absolutely.
So there's not one set answer to that whatsoever.
Yeah, you get a lot of different results. Even a lot of times I'll know if I have a high quality coffee and I have everything dialed in nicely based on the flavor that I'm getting once it cools down. If it kind of stays sort of similar, then I'm doing something right. It says,
Looks like you have another one.
Weird Flex asks, if I'm using filtered water, would you recommend adding third wave for my Gaja Evo Pro?
So if you're adding third wave, make sure that you're doing their espresso profile one first off, and then you're also adding that to distilled water, so something that's already pretty empty, because there are specific parameters that we want in order to really actually start enhancing that flavor profile, and we're also not producing scale or we're stripping our boiler. So there's a fine line in between, which I would highly recommend. We do a water seminar as well, tuning into that next time we have that as well.
Yeah, water chemistry is wild. There's all these variables, and it gets very into the weeds. And it's a subject that they're always discovering something new. Yeah,
so if you have any specific questions on water, feel free to call us as well. Or, if you have a dying question, we can definitely come up with another seminar from those as well. So All right, any other last questions before we sign off here? Looks like we had a great crowd out there. Thank you for all the questions, and thank you for joining us today. Again, we're going to be around if you do need to call in and ask any specific questions, but make sure to check out our seminar schedule online. We'll have that posted, as well as our coffee cast schedule. So I believe this time tomorrow we have something very exciting happening with Ben, who's actually our director today, about freezing coffee and the effects of coffee, both in a roasted format, green format, and what happens to the coffee during that process. Does it help? Should you be freezing your coffee, and how should you be freezing your coffee?
I'm super excited for that one because we get a lot of questions about, should I be freezing my coffee? Should I put it in the fridge? So it's going to answer a lot of burning questions that you all have out there. Yeah.
At least burning for us. It's very burning for us.
Or freezing questions.
Yeah.
Rather.
Yes. The opposite. All right. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Zach.
I'm Missy.
And we'll see you next time.